Exodia versus Egyptian gods. Who's the strongest when we compare these creatures? I bet you've asked yourself this question when you were younger, just like I did. A lot of people might say, well, clearly Exodia. After all, if you manage to draw all 5 pieces, you automatically win the duel, even if you're up against the 3 Egyptian gods. Or maybe, but wait, we're talking about the Egyptian gods here. Would they really be beaten that easily? Well, it's not that simple, especially when we're talking about the duels that took place in ancient Egypt, 4,000 years before the card game imagined by Pegasus in the first season was created. To give you an idea, back then, many of these creatures, like Exodia, the Egyptian gods, and even the Blue Eyes White Dragon, were used in attempts to defeat another creature named Zorc. Yes, there was a creature so powerful, it took all these titans and more to bring it down. So, in this video, we're going to talk about the most powerful creatures in the YuGiOh universe, including the Egyptian gods and Exodia, ranking them in power. Curious to know? Then stay tuned, because this is the second video in our YuGiOh series on the channel. Make sure to like this video, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because I've got tons of cool videos about this anime coming soon. Let's dive in, guys. First, what are we gonna do? We'll list the most powerful creatures in the YuGiOh universe, then imagine different scenarios where these creatures face off, and finally, we'll rank the top 5 strongest. We'll base this on the duels from ancient Egypt. Afterward, we'll also touch on the card game itself. The first one, breaking the seal of the Millennium items and brought back from his exile in the Shadow Realm, is Zorc the Dark One. To remind you of just how powerful he was, his titles include Great Evil God Zorc, the one born from the darkness within people's hearts, and finally, the being who gave power to create the Millennium items, as well as the creator of the Shadow Realm. Pretty intense, right? He's the main villain of the memory arc and by far one of the most powerful creatures we've been introduced to in the manga and anime so far. His goal? To merge the Shadow Realm with the human world and reign over it. Zorc is a divine creature in the YuGiOh universe, a status that very few others share. Next, we have Exodia the Forbidden One, and for those who missed it, we covered him in the first video of this series, so after finishing this one, it'll pop up on the screen for you to check out. He's the Supreme Guardian of Egypt. But don't be fooled, guys. Even with his overwhelming power, Exodia is not a god. First, here's a key point. His card categorizes him as a spellcaster-type monster with a dark attribute, while, for example, Obelisk is defined as a divine beast. Sure, that might seem like a small detail related to the physical card game. And yes, this could be countered by pointing out the timeline, as Exodia was introduced before the Egyptian gods and Zorc, so if he had been created later, he might have been classified as a god. But even so, I think it's worth mentioning this distinction. Also, Exodia is a mighty guardian who can be summoned as a dark creature in both the anime and manga by people other than the pharaoh, whereas the other divine beings have more specific conditions. Zorc, for instance, requires the full Millennium item ritual, and the Egyptian gods can only be summoned by the pharaoh. Now let's talk about the Egyptian gods: Obelisk the Tormentor, Slifer the Sky Dragon, and the Winged Dragon of Ra. First, we'll discuss them as a group, but if you've seen and remember the memory arc, you know it's essential to separate them for a deeper discussion. The 3 Egyptian gods are all classified as divine beast-type creatures, and their status as deities is recognized by the characters. In both the anime and manga, their powers are considered infinite, a detail that, in the anime, each Egyptian god card has around 20 effects, but in the Shadow Realm, they're just immensely powerful. Before moving forward, I want to highlight something important: the nature of divinity in YuGiOh. At first, what I'm about to say may sound crazy, but hear me out, it'll make sense. What makes something divine in YuGiOh? It essentially comes down to the creature's inherent nature. Let's go in the pre-established order. Zorc is literally the god of darkness. Slifer could be interpreted as a god of the sky. Obelisk is a god of the earth, and the Winged Dragon of Ra is the god of the sun, or fire. So, guys, looking at it from this perspective, Exodia stands apart, and this classification alone already limits his power. Another important point: for those who watch the memory arc all the way through, which takes place long before the actual card games existed in that universe, you know how Zorc was defeated and by whom. Yes, it was Pharaoh Adam. By sacrificing the 3 Egyptian gods, he summoned a very interesting creature, and let me just say, for storyline reasons in both the anime and manga, this monster is by definition the most powerful and would technically be at the top of the ranking. I'm talking about Holactie, the creator of light. Essentially, despite the name, this creature is the creator of everything. What's even cooler is their card in the game. It requires you to tribute not 1, not 2, but all 3 Egyptian gods to summon it, and if you do that, you win the duel. Yes, this card has a win condition similar to Exodia, but honestly, I think this is much much harder to pull off, and I've never heard of a deck that uses all 3 gods, let alone this card, whereas Exodia decks aren't that uncommon to see. And since we're talking about cards, it's worth mentioning that Zorc actually has a physical card, a ritual card with an effect involving dice and stuff, but it's not exactly the same Zorc from the anime, though in Duel Links, it's tied to Bakura. Given all of this, let's get to the point. The battle scenarios between these creatures based on events from the anime and manga. First scenario, Zorc versus Exodia. The first to square off against Zorc is our beloved Exodia. And when I say square off, I mean it literally. Exodia was able to engage in a physical battle, even ripping off one of Zorc's arms. In return, Zorc also ripped off one of Exodia's arms. But don't worry, both regenerated. Zorc even took an obliterate to the face, and in the end, cut Exodia in half. But wait, didn't Exodia have an automatic victory effect? Not here, because this isn't the card game. So yes, the obliterate attack, which in the card game would symbolize the player's victory, isn't unbeatable in this context. Can we say that Exodia lost because of the energy limitations of its summoner? Maybe, but it's hard to find arguments that place Exodia above Zorc, especially given the limited material available, since, in the manga, Exodia only launches obliterate and dies. We know from the anime that Zorc has infinite power because he draws strength from the darkness, whereas Exodia's power, as a summoned creature, is limited by the spiritual energy of its summoner. Anyway, Exodia did put up a serious fight against Zorc, but come on, ripping off an arm? With all due respect to Exodia, even the Blue Eyes White Dragon did the same thing to Zorc in the anime, and the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon also held its ground. That said, these two would undoubtedly lose to Exodia without much difficulty. I'll say it again. If Exodia were summoned by the Pharaoh or someone younger and more powerful than Counselor Shaimon, maybe Exodia could have won, especially if the battle took place under specific conditions, like the sun not being blocked out by the darkness that further strengthens Zorc. Second scenario, Zorc versus Egyptian gods. This one's interesting. Zorc battles all 3 gods at the same time, and for a moment we even think the gods are going to win because, at a certain point in the anime, when the winged dragon of Ra was summoned, it was kind of presented as a victory condition for the shadow game that Bakura and the Pharaoh were playing. The advantage the Egyptian gods had was that, with Ra's summoning, the sun, which had been blocked by darkness, shone again, weakening Zorc. But as soon as the sun was fully covered by darkness once more, all 3 gods were defeated at the same time. Anyway, after this comes Zorc's defeat, which I've already talked about, and consequently the end of this part of the memory arc. But we still have more to discuss here. Third scenario, Exodia versus Egyptian gods. Since this battle never happened in any source, this part will be 100% speculative. Here, I'll blend some of the ideas I've already mentioned throughout the video. First, there's the nature of the Egyptian gods, and then there's the matter of Exodia's power depending on energy. So, the gods' power comes from their inherent nature. Just like Zorc drew energy from darkness, it can be assumed that the gods also draw their energy from their respective sources. An example? The winged dragon of Ra and the sun, it's no coincidence that he's the most powerful of the 3 Egyptian gods. While researching, I saw a lot of people saying that Exodia would defeat all the Egyptian gods individually. I don't believe that right off the bat, because we go back to the point already discussed in the anime. Exodia lost to Zorc because Zorc has infinite energy and Exodia doesn't. And this, to me, extends to the other Egyptian gods, which would put Exodia in last place. But let's do this. Let's say that after being summoned, Exodia is at full strength. In other words, let's say that Pharaoh Atum himself summons everyone, and Exodia faces them one by one. I think Exodia would destroy both Slifer and Obelisk, especially since those two really struggled in the memory arc, and it's the winged dragon of Ra who ultimately saves them. So, I really do think that Exodia, as a complete creature of darkness, would be able to defeat Slifer and Obelisk. But I'm sorry. The winged dragon of Ra is above him, and not by a small margin. Even so, it would be awesome to see Ra in his flaming form going head-to-head with Exodia's obliterate. Fourth scenario, the winged dragon of Ra versus Slifer versus Obelisk. The winged dragon of Ra is the strongest, period. There's no debate. Since his introduction in the Battle City arc, he's presented as the greatest and most powerful of the Egyptian gods, and this is definitively confirmed in the battle against Zorc. But the question is, what about Slifer and Obelisk? This is tricky. Most people I saw discussing this put Slifer above Obelisk, and in fact that makes sense. Obelisk is limited to the earth while Slifer reigns in the skies. There's even a moment in the fight against Zorc where Obelisk is awkwardly hanging in the air, holding onto Zorc's foot like a rag doll. With that said, I tend to agree agree with the majority here. Slifer is stronger than Obelisk. Now let's get to the final verdict of our ranking. 6th place, Obelisk the Tormentor. In 5th, Slifer the Sky Dragon. 4th, Exodia the Forbidden One. In 3rd, the Winged Dragon of Ra. 2nd, Dark Master Zorc. And in 1st place, Holactie the Creator of Light. So I've decided to go with the ranking where Exodia ends up having his power maximized. Given all the background involving him, Slifer, and Obelisk, this order seems fair to me. The top 3 are pretty self-explanatory and hard to disagree with since they're heavily tied to the storyline. Now, keep in mind, everything we've discussed here refers to the duels before Maximilian Pegasus created the card game. We're talking about the creatures summoned from stones in ancient Egypt. But since I know you're also curious about how these creatures would interact in the card game, here are some thoughts about the TCG. First of all, Slifer was never used seriously. Obelisk did have some success because, like the other gods, he can be special summoned. But what sets him apart is that he can't be targeted by spells, traps, or card effects and has a field wiping effect on the opponent. The Winged Dragon of Ra, on the other hand, in its traditional form, never saw competitive play. However, the Winged Dragon of Ra, Sphere Mode, that one did, since it allows you to tribute 3 of your opponent's monsters to summon it. A pretty game-changing move at that point. Zorc has his ritual card with its wild effect, and I've always seen it as a meme. There might be a serious deck for him, but I've never seen it. But the 2 that stand above the rest are Exodia and Holactie, since they both have the same automatic win condition. However, there's a catch. Holactie needs to be summoned onto the field for its auto-win effect to activate. Interestingly, its summoning doesn't involve the fusion of the gods, but rather their tribute, sacrificing all 3. Whereas with Exodia, you just need to draw all 5 cards into your hand, at least in the official game, right? In the anime, you also have to summon all 5 cards on the field. In theory, whoever gets summoned first wins, since it would be impossible for both to be on the field at the same time to see which effect overrides the other. If we were to imagine such an impossible scenario, maybe Holactie's effect would prevail, since it is the creator of everything. One more thing, Holactie must be summoned to the field via tribute, and that can only happen on your turn, which is a limiting factor. Exodia, on the other hand, through certain plays involving traps or monster effects that let you draw cards, allows you to win the game on your opponent's turn. If I activate a trap, for example, that lets me draw a card, and it happens to be the final piece of Exodia, I win. As for facing the Egyptian gods, first off, Holactie couldn't fight all 3 because it comes from their tribute, and there's only 1 copy of each Egyptian god in the world of YuGiOh. And if it were Exodia, yes, his auto-win effect would trigger even if all 3 Egyptian gods were on the field. So guys, I know some of you might leave this video feeling a bit disappointed with Exodia. After all, I believe he's a fan favorite for many of you, but at least in the card game, he still remains unbeatable. Now, tell me, which one is your favorite among the ones I mentioned here? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the upcoming videos. Also, check out the previous video on the channel explaining why was Exodia sealed and separated into 5 pieces.